Quinn.
Hi.
How are you?
Exhausted, as usual.
Same. I feel like we start every show talking about how awful we feel.
Well, I mean, we're in college. That's a given, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and it's, like, for me at least, the first and last thing I do every week on campus is the radio. So Monday, the first thing is the news show. And then on Fridays, it's this show. So it's a really nice bookend for me. And, you know, it's kind of like the end of the week. So just all of that exhaustion has just built up into today. But this show always gets me hype and energized for the weekend.
If I were ever energized, this show would be the thing to do it. I don't know that it's ever happened before, though.
Yeah, you are actually just energy proof.
It's true. I exist at a constant level of excitement through all things.
I've actually never seen you show an emotion. Never, not once. Even that laugh, not an emotion.
No, just purely robotic. Just replicating human emotion to not be outed as the robot that I am.
You are Quinn. I am Zero. This is a show that we have decided to call Z.Q, and the curtain in the television station across the hall from us is retracting.
This is the first time I've seen him there.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, the studio that we record in is glass on all sides. Well, I guess not the floor and ceiling, but it's
the
windows.
Other sides.
It's windowed, and there's a hallway, and then also directly across from us is the television studio, which is also windowed, and they have this big black curtain that they draw across it. You know, when controlling how much light gets in there is a sensitive topic. That didn't make sense. When controlling how much light gets in there is important to whatever they're doing in there. And yeah, I don't think I've ever seen the curtain moving. So that was
I've never seen behind the curtain.
Me.
I'm like seeing the wizard.
The wonderful wizard of spotlights.
Yeah, it's mostly spotlights.
Because it's 2 stories, the basement and the first floor. And since we're on the first floor, we can see all of the spotlights and stuff, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Moving on to our show instead of whatever they're filming.
Oh, I wasn't ready to move on, though.
Oh, Lord.
You know how last week we heard that weird childish giggling?
Yeah.
So the control room and like the production room for the studio that's across the hall from us is right below us.
Oh.
And so if they're having a class in there or anything, that echoes up into this room. Sometimes it comes through on radio, sometimes it doesn't. On last week's episode, it did not come through in the recording, but I left in that like big 10-second silence because we then immediately talked about that big awkward silence and the scary like childish laughing that was really haunting and uncomfortable.
Well, mystery solved. A little less exciting than a ghost, but...
I mean, it might be a ghost. We might be a ghost. This used to be a dorm room. So...
I think my dad was actually in this building back when it was a dorm.
Yeah, my mom RA'd in this building. And they recently converted it into the class building for public relations and communication arts. Studies. Comm studies? Whichever one it is. Yeah. Anyway.
A little bit of history on the building we record this in.
You know, last week we talked about how our show is nothing if not an ape of the Nerdist podcast.
Yeah.
They, for a long time, would always talk about how they didn't own the building they were recording in. They had no attachment to it. So they just, were waiting for it to fall apart, to rebuild in its ashes.
They did have a lot of digressions about the building they were in at the time.
Well, because the guest's headphone jack was broken. Mm-hmm. So, like, Alton Brown would come in and be like, am I supposed to have headphones? And they'd be like, nah. But they'd, like, do that after recording or like during the recording. So it would always come through. on the show.
Anyway, to our show.
For the weekly roundup. This week, we're really just talking about the Nintendo Switch.
Yes.
So the Nintendo Switch launched today.
I think so.
Today is its first big hooray, first big day. And the reviews actually seem really positive.
Yeah, for the most part. Like, I definitely have some reservations just because it's a lot of that kind of gimmicky Nintendo hardware, which I've never been good at using.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people had those same reservations, and to some extent they seem to be valid concerns. Like Polygon, where I read almost all of my gaming review news stuff. And now the curtain's closed again, and I missed it. Oh no, wait, the lights are just off. We should part of the reason I don't like this room being glass on most of the sides is that I'm so easily distracted. Anyway, talking about the Nintendo Switch.
Yes.
A lot of reviews seem to be similar to what you're saying. They were very concerned about the gimmickiness and the Nintendo hardware, sort of prizing originality over functionality in some cases.
Which is a really good kind of succinct summation of my issues with Nintendo as a company. Yeah,
and this, the Nintendo Switch really seems to answer that in a lot of ways. One of the common themes in the Polygon reviews were, everyone who used it had this moment of, oh crap, it works.
Yeah.
When you so for those of you who don't know, the Nintendo Switch is a combination mobile console game platform that you can either dock and hook up to your computer or television and use as a more traditional gaming console, or you can
take apart the controller, reassemble the controller around a tablet, and it's a mobile game now.
Yes. And it really, like I said, it everyone's like, oh, it works. Mostly because the Switch was speculated to have a lot of the same problems that the Wii U had. I think the Wii U was the Nintendo's experimental phase leading up to the Switch, I think.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that as kind of like a intermediate stage between the Wii and the Switch.
Yeah, and the Switch really seems to be answering those promises that the Wii U made but couldn't deliver on. Mm-hmm. So the Polygon's video review of it is titled Polished Hardware, Unfinished Software, and Expensive Accessories. Which, I mean, expensive accessories is kind of just, unfortunately, kind of the state of play these days.
Yeah, that's an industry standard that I'm really dissatisfied with generally.
Yeah, same, because I am poor.
Yep.
But it does seem to be an industry standard, and $30 for the Pro controller, $30 for the charger hub. Well, so you can charge them with the console, but there's the biggest gimmick of the Switch is that it comes with sort of two controller modules called Joy-Cons. Each one has a set of 4 buttons and a joystick, and they can be put together to form one small controller. They can be used independently. They can be put onto sort of a central hub to have a more traditional controller.
Which looks like a really poorly designed Xbox 360 controller, basically.
Yeah, but it from what I've heard it's actually it's decent.
Okay.
It's not the best, but it's decent.
I maintain that the 360 had the best designed controller of the modern console generation. Since the original Xbox, GameCube, Strata.
I mean, I've always had because I have these weird spidery hands that you think would be really good at video games because I can reach all the buttons, but they're not, because my hand has to like curl around the controllers in weird ways.
Yeah, that's why you're a PC gamer. But
that's why I'm a PC gamer. Also, just because I'm just supremely bad at everything to do with games, and
it's really funny.
With a PC, I can make that so much easier on myself. Yeah, but the sort of to get your Joy-Cons into this controller configuration, you have the hub that the console ships with, which does not include a charger. And then there's an optional charging hub, which is like $30. The Pro controller is $70, which is kind of your more standard Xbox 360 looking controller.
That looks like what I would have to get to play this game.
Yeah, and it's pretty steep, but I think where the Switch really delivers on its promises is that, one, it does work. That combination of mobile and console, standard, more typical console gaming is definitely there. But also the ability to, right out of the box, have two-player games.
Yeah.
Because you can, just take the two Joy-Cons apart and each player could use one, and right out of the box you're like up and running, which is really nice. I'm really skeptical of that functionality in particular, and none of the reviews I've seen have really gone into much depth on that, but they are not symmetrical. Like, they're not the same. Yeah. So each one has a slightly different control scheme, and they look like really, really small Wiimotes. Yeah, so they each have a joystick and a set of 4 buttons. One of them it's a D-pad, one of them it's like A, B, X, Y. So that's fairly standard as far as what's on them. But they're right, physically arranged differently. They're not symmetrical, which for me at least is aesthetically more than anything bothers me. I think gameplay wise, I think it'll be a little bit of a learning curve, but people will get used to using both of them. They look too small to me. I mean they are pretty small, but on this sort of the kind of game that you're using the dual Joy-Con, functionality for, it's it's gonna be party games. Like, it's gonna be Broforce, where you need to like jump and shoot, and things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if you got a lot of very simple party games that require very few controls, and so the joystick and the 4-button scheme is going to work just fine. It does sound like you would have to buy like another like Pro controller or hub and Joy-Con set to do like proper 2-player gaming on something like even like Splatoon. There's a little more to it than that. Yeah, and I don't know that. So we know that Splatoon is coming to the Switch, and I think that Splatoon, where it really has its strength, is in online multiplayer, and so I think it'll just depend on what shape the titles take. Yeah. So if Splatoon ends up being huge, then the Pro controller or another set of Joy-Cons is definitely going to be the way to go. Yeah. Well, like, my thing is, and one of the things that I appreciate about Nintendo, because my opinions are complex and have both positive and negative sides, is that they seem to be kind of the one company still that previously anyway were still championing couch co-op, which has always been my favorite style of gameplay. Yes, and I think that is still there. I think I'm suspicious. Yeah, it does seem to be less present at the very least. And looking at the titles it launches with, so the big one, which we'll get to more in a minute, is Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is just a 1-player game. But I think seeing what they do with the inevitable Smash Brothers Switch is going to be really interesting. Yeah. Because we all know that's coming, and I mean, I'm excited for it. But it'll be interesting to see how they pull that off, because I do agree with you. Nintendo has always seems to have had this philosophy of making the physically communal experience of gaming feasible. I guess you always could like play Call of Duty couch co-op, but it definitely wasn't built for that.
Right, and certainly not in the way that old shooters were.
Yeah, and certainly not in the way that, you know, even the most recent iterations, well, not the DS iteration, but, you know, the more recent iterations of Smash Brothers were built. But that said, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic about Nintendo's ability to course correct with this, especially since, you know, with the Wii U, I think it came out and was so far behind that it catching up was, you know, sort of all of Nintendo's course correcting resources. Whereas I think with the Switch, Nintendo's course correcting resources can go more towards polishing it to the extent that it needs to be. Ultimately, very excited about it though. So it launched with a couple of small titles, and some are just porting over games from previous platforms.
Some seem to be kind of hardware proof of concept stuff that they gamified.
Yes, there's in particular there's a platformer called Celeste that seems to have a very simple control scheme and be hard as nails, sort of in the Super Meat Boy vein. That does very much seem to be proof of concept stuff that they've gamified, which I don't mind.
No, I don't either.
I really enjoy those kinds of games. Like just today, because today was payday, and I was looking at the Steam on sale category. I bought a couple of games, one of which is called Bamboo EP, and it's basically just like, let's find some mechanics and then build a game around it. And very much seems to be a similarly proof of concept, very simple, high replayability, which is where I sort of talk about the party gaminess of the Switch that I think it could handle really well.
Yeah.
But the big title is Breath of the Wild.
Right. The new Legend of Zelda, and possibly the best game ever based on the reviews.
Yeah, so
I think it's actually like second overall in terms of review positivity.
Yeah, it's gotten so almost perfect scores from everyone who's reviewed it. And I read through Polygon's review earlier, and it seems to be, I mean, first of all, it's one of the largest video game worlds we've ever seen. It's like somewhere between like 6 and 9 times the size of Skyrim.
Yeah.
Which to me personally is terrifying. Because when especially when I first heard this, it was terrifying, because I'm very worried, as we've discussed previously, about side quest or completionist bloat. But that seems to be, something that Nintendo was concerned about and addressed. In the review I read, it talks about the side quests mostly being in the form of shrines, which are like kind of puzzle dungeony, and being very well done, staying interesting and engaging, and being totally optional. And so Breath of the Wild is an open world RPG. So you have that exploration element is there, and the side quests seem to be there to flesh that out, while still making a direct, end run possible. And even, so there's main quest, and then there's sort of the peripheral main quests that you can do to flesh out the story. And then there are like the proper side quests,
right,
like the shrines. And so, the reviewer was like 60 to 70 hours in and was, making his way towards the end. He was pretty, close to finished, if not done, doing sort of a middle completion percentage, getting a good flavor of the game rather than trying to experience it all. But, it's very evident that if you want to, not even speed run it, but if you just want to play the main storyline and get to the end, you can. He did say that there was a good bit of beef gating, which is always something that I have a little bit of an issue with, because usually it just feels like it's done very poorly. But, again, it's something that Nintendo put a lot of effort into getting right. Mm-hmm. And so it seems to have... Breath of the Wild seems to have a whole array of very well-balanced mechanics wrapped around a pretty tight and compelling story. The big sort of, takeaway quote that he ends the review with is, Breath of the Wild also almost always feels like a Zelda game and establishes itself as the first current vital feeling Zelda game in almost 20 years. Which is, I think, high praise for a game that has been, or for a series that has been turning these out every, few years. I can think of Link to the Past, Skyward Sword was a little bit ago, but there have been a lot.
Yeah. And a lot of them actually came out on like the DS type things. There was like Spirit Tracks, and there were a couple weird ones like that.
Yeah, and based on just, the different hardware, very different types of games. I think Skyward Sword, and there was one other one that came out on the Wii or the Wii U that were both very awkward because of the swinging mechanic. And in this one it's a press A to swing sword rather than a swing arm to swing sword kind of thing.
Yeah, which is always preferable.
Always preferable. Although it doesn't give me an excuse to hit my brother, which is a little disappointing. But yeah, that's Breath of the Wild, incredibly well reviewed. The Nintendo Switch, really well reviewed. And if you're interested in, Nintendo stuff, you've probably already heard about it. And if you're interested and not broke, you've probably already gotten it.
And if you would like a more in-depth review from the two of us, feel free to send us both a console and that game, and we will happily play and review it.
Oh yes, absolutely. If you want to, so you'll play it, I'll watch, and if there's a lock-picking minigame, I'll steal that from you.
Yes. I haven't gotten to pick a lock in Fallout in years.
That's not true. Because sometimes you do it while I'm sitting there watching you play, and you just refuse to give me the controller.
Because you're often reading a book or something, and I don't want to disturb you.
There are not many things that I would say that I'm always okay with being disturbed for the sake of. Lockpicking minigames are one of them.
All right, I'll bear that in mind.
Lockpicking minigames are my favorite part of any video game, just kind of carte blanche.
What an odd thing to have as your favorite part of video games, but I can respect it.
I mean, especially because in recent years, they just seem to be so well done. Like Assassin's Creed really seemed to get that right. And the one I remember right now is Unity. Really seemed to get it right in Unity. Black Flag was really disappointing because you just shot the lock off. But yeah, any of the Bethesda lockpicking minigames, I really enjoy. And just, it's something that's so simple, and if done right, really makes a game for me, and if done wrong, really ruins a game for me. Because, this is a very basic mechanical, not even a challenge, just a mechanical part of your game, and you seem to have not done it well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's it for the weekly roundup, which somehow took even longer than usual, despite us starting early. So we are going to take a quick break, and then we're going to be back. We're going to be talking about science fiction movies this week.
Yeah, so we've each got 3-ish. That might change a little bit depending on how on task we stay today.
Yes.
Sci-fi movies that we enjoy that we've explicitly forbidden big tentpole properties like Star Wars, Star Trek, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because those will almost certainly be getting their own episodes down the line where we will talk about them in detail. So this is other sci-fi movies, and some of them are still part of franchises, but only because they keep reviving everything as a franchise now. Yeah,
if it was made in the 80s or 90s, it's gonna come back before 2020.
I wish that were true with one of mine.
So we're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back. We are back. We are ready to talk about some science fiction movies.
We are, and I mean, I don't know exactly how strict we're being as far as science fiction, because the boundaries of that genre are constantly up for debate, but...
They are, and I think they, you know, when I talk about science fiction, it's mostly, is it fiction rooted in science? You know, I take a very broad approach, I guess.
Which is good, because two of my movies, there has been some debate as to whether or not they're sci-fi. Which we're going to start with my favorite movie of all time. And this is not exactly like a deep pull or anything. This is not a recommendation that's going to blow anyone's mind. And it's also something that is now part of a big tentpole franchise, unfortunately. And that's Jurassic Park.
It's part of it's part of a big tentpole franchise, but it's not really part of a successful one. There are like 2 good movies in that series as of right now.
Well, there's one perfect movie and one all right movie, and 2 really bad ones.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
But I maintain that the original is in fact perfect.
Not a controversial opinion.
Yep. Not at all. And this is like, if you haven't seen it, definitely do. Because like I have met some people where like the release date of 1992 is like, oh, it's sci-fi from before like good CGI. I'll pass. And it's like, no, this is where good CGI comes from.
Yeah, no, it absolutely holds up.
It does. And yeah, like the monsters aren't quite as, they're not quite as like flashy or like have all the elements of realism that, you know, a CG monster and something from this year would have. But you definitely believe there's a T-Rex on screen.
Yeah, it definitely feels, you know, even if they're not perfect, the believability of them, the level at which they're done is perfect for the visual tone of the movie.
Like, in addition to being just a really good kind of adventure story, all of the characters are great, I would say. Except maybe Lex.
All of the characters are well done. A lot of them are extremely unlikable. Not a lot. Some of them are extremely unlikable.
Two of them.
On purpose.
And there is some debate about this, and if you read the book is definitely like speculative fiction, like a fairly sober look at genetic engineering as it was perceived in the 80s and 90s. And, you know, like perceptions of history and like media influences on the progression of science. And a lot of that is toned down a lot in the movie. Mm-hmm. But the book also had big dinosaur chases too, so it's not like they added stupidity and took out intelligence. They just cut a lot of subplots.
Yeah, and one of the when you know, I've encountered Jurassic Park sort of being analyzed, you know, from a literature standpoint, or you know, as far as the movie from, you know, a meaningful cinema standpoint, the critique has always revolved around capitalism and industrialized science.
Yeah, that theme is definitely still present.
Yeah, and I think the book handles it really well. I do think it's, you know, Michael Crichton is sticking to his guns. You know, he's coming out, he's making a statement. He's not like, you know, giving a full complex view of the issue and all viewpoints on it. He's like, no, this is how things stand from a science standpoint, and also this is what I think about all of that. And yeah, it's hard to argue with him, I think.
Yeah, and like he does present a contrasting viewpoint character in the book, but then feeds him to chicken dinosaurs. So
yeah,
he lives in the movie. Which, spoilers, but you should really
wait. Which character?
Hammond.
That's right.
Hammond's kind of the bad guy in the book.
Hammond was a villain in the book, and then they got and now I can't remember his name.
Richard Attenborough.
And then they got Richard Attenborough.
And he's incapable of like being like threatening and non-charming. So they did change Hammond's stance in a lot of ways, and gave a lot of his more like corporatist beliefs to like the lawyer who was they switched around some characters' moralities, but kept a lot of the same arguments present. So I have no real complaints.
Yeah, and anytime we talk about movies that are adapted from a source material that is not another movie, we always have to talk about medium affecting message. And I think in the case of Jurassic Park, and one of the movies that I'll talk about later, The Martian, the changes they make are changes that are, if not necessary, go a long way to making the content and the message work within the medium.
So I guess we'll go ahead and move on to my second one for time's sake, but I could talk about Jurassic Park for literal days.
And, when Jurassic World 2 comes out,
we probably will.
We'll probably have an entire episode just the same thing with, when The Last Jedi comes out and when, the inevitable next Star Trek movie comes out.
And Guardians 2.
And Guardians 2. We'll have episodes where we just talk about, the MCU and just talk about Star Trek and just talk about Star Wars. And we'll probably have guests for some of those.
Yeah, which is why we have kind of banned them from which, to clarify, this is not my top 3 sci-fi movies because it goes Jurassic Park, Empire Strikes Back, New Hope. So
this is top 3 excluding Star Wars and Star Trek.
Yeah, and MCU because Guardians is in my top 5. It's a fun movie, okay?
Yeah.
But, okay, so second on the list I'm bringing to the table today is it looked for a long time as though this was going to be kind of a standalone and not part of a big franchise, but now it looks like it might be part of a big franchise again. Pacific Rim.
Yeah, so they're making at least a second one, Maelstrom?
Yes.
Maelstrom.
Strum.
And there's speculation about a third. I don't know why I did that kind of inflection. There's speculation about a third.
Yes.
I don't know if it's confirmed yet, but
I think because the first one did not do great in theaters, inexplicably.
Yeah, no, it definitely didn't do great in theaters. It was an instant cult classic.
Yeah, and I think with kind of the hype that has been built around the first one in the intervening years, the second one's going to be a big enough success to financially justify a third one. So I think we're getting a third one.
What if it's a big enough financial success to justify another movie in the Book of Life series? Because that was, oh my gosh, was that not Guillermo del Toro?
I think that was him.
Yeah, he
was involved in
Guillermo
both.
del
I don't know if he was the director of both.
But he was, if memory serves, infinitely involved in Book of Life, and it was supposed to be very many in the movies in that series, and it did kind of, it was lukewarm in the box office.
I liked it.
It was good though, and so hopefully we can get another one out of Guillermo del Toro making a ton of money off of other things.
Yeah, and then hopefully he'll finally get to make his Mountains of Madness movie that he's wanted to make for 20 years.
Yeah, that would be real good.
It would.
There's not nearly enough Lovecraft cinema. I mean, part of it is because it's hard because he describes everything as,
indescribable
and unknowable. But,
I think if anyone could do it.
Yeah. And so much good horror is about, what you don't tell and what you don't show as much as what you do. And I think Lovecraft kind of, if you're going into it with that mentality, it's perfect material. But yeah, Pacific Rim.
Right, which I have described repeatedly in my personal life as the best big dumb punchy movie in existence.
And an evaluation that I agree with.
Yeah, and to clarify a little bit, I don't use big dumb punchy movie as an insult or a mark of quality. It is purely a descriptor of tone. They do ultimately solve their problem by punching it really hard with robots, but
yeah, and that's not to say that there's no meat there. I think, and we were talking about this earlier, the robots serve in the plot as this very oblique, obvious solution is staring you right in the face, but you're not listening. Something that could be applied to things like clean energy. An obvious solution to the energy crisis has been staring us in the face for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And it's only just now gaining traction. or just now, I guess, gaining the traction that it should have gained so many years ago.
Yeah, it's like that Onion headline. It's like scientists remind world that clean energy's been ready to go for whenever, for like a long time now.
Just ready to go whenever. Yeah. So Big Dumb Punchy movie is definitely the tone and perhaps the subgenre of the movie. But it's definitely not a pejorative.
Yeah. And like the only reason I would say it's not like a message movie necessarily is because the ultimate resolution of the plot doesn't really tie into the metaphor. They kind of just kill their problem.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what the best way to describe Pacific Rim is it's GDT looking at a bunch of sort of almost micro messages that he wants to convey.
Yeah.
Because there are lessons about acceptance of science and acceptance of clear solutions and questioning political expediency and all equality of gender and race and all sorts of things.
Yeah. It also has the message of save your sword finishing move until the very end of the fight because it'll look coolest then.
Yes. In which it's GDT taking all of these micro messages and GDT taking all of these small things that he couldn't quite justify in their own movie visually, like punching an office building and setting a Newton's cradle rocking.
Yeah.
And he's, working those together to make what is ultimately a really good, really enjoyable 2 hours of cinema.
Yeah. It's like a live action anime that has a bunch of kind of little points within it.
Yeah, that's a fair way to describe it.
And it's very good in that respect. And do we have time for me to do my third? If I keep it really quick? Or...
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So
alternatively, we could just make this into a two-parter and next week come back and do like my half of things.
I don't know if I have that much to say about this movie.
Well, we'll go to 4 and 5.
I wasn't prepared for this.
We'll make it
All right.
work.
Okay. We'll do this a two-parter. That's fine.
But we're going to go to a quick music break. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about some more of your movies.
Alrighty.
Quinn, we're back.
We are. And now that the show has shifted focus drastically to me, I am not coping with the stress well.
I am always ready to zag on you, and you should always be prepared for me to zag on you.
Uh-huh.
Because ultimately, I have supreme control of the show because I sit at the board and computer.
Yeah, I know.
And also edit it.
Oh, boy.
So, in a lot of ways, you should be prepared for my arbitrary decisions and just general tyranny.
Please send help. Okay, so the next movie I'm going to talk about is one that I came up with during the break as a thing to talk about. And I clarify that because we've been referencing my third, and we're saving that for later just to heighten the suspense. So this is kind of like the fourth thing I will talk about today. It's just, you're getting it out of order, like in Memento, which is not the movie I'm going to be talking about, but is a movie.
Is a movie and is a fairly decent one, I think.
Yeah, I enjoyed Memento.
This is also a conversation we've had before, off air, you and I.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yes. I was about to say, what about Memento have we talked about?
No,
it's not Memento.
About I Am Legend,
which is the fourth movie that I will discuss. This is definitely a qualified recommendation, which is to say the theatrical cut is one of the worst book-to-screen adaptations I've ever sat through. There exists a non-theatrical version.
The director's cut.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if it's like the direct. I'm not exactly sure what it's called. I found it on the internet once. Don't do piracy, kids.
Do not do piracy, kids.
Yep,
a PSA brought to you from Quinn's glorious noggin.
Gee, thanks. So, yeah, there exists a non-theatrical cut that is actually really, really good, and I'm about to explain why. So, the movie does rely on a twist.
Yes.
For a lot of its emotional punch, and I am going to spoil that twist in explaining how the original cut ruined that twist.
So, if you are sensitive to spoilers, now is the time to look away with your ears.
Yes. So just pause your radio, because that's a power that you have.
I mean, I was going to say, like, turn it down, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, just skip ahead a little bit. Anyway,
so the plot is, like, this guy is, like, the last human left, like, possibly in the world, definitely in the island of Manhattan, after, like, a plague thing that's kind of unimportant to my recommendation, turns everybody else into, and this depends on the cut of the movie you find, but in the book, they're vampires, basically. In the theatrical cut of the movie, they're basically blood-sucking zombies that burn in sunlight. It's... So, the reason it's called I Am Legend, and the twist in both the book and the good cut of the movie, is that the vampires are actually, like, intelligent and compassionate and have their own society. They're just monsters to Will Smith because he's still human.
yeah, well, and they have this, like, weird vampire puberty stage.
Yeah.
Which is why they, initially appear non-sentient. There's a like 6 months to a year
Yeah, I forget the timeline on
period
there.
where they are basically just blood-sucking zombies.
But then, like, that is temporary.
Yeah, and eventually they're just, like, people, but
They're
different.
not exactly people, but yeah, like, they're sentient beings with, like, their own culture and society, and within that culture, he, in his, like, years of fighting vampires, has become, like, their vampire.
Yeah, he's become their ooky spooky boogeyman.
Right, which is why it's called I Am Legend. And in the good cut of the movie, they keep that twist, and it's great, and he recognizes that he's kind of been doing a bad thing by killing all of these vampires. And in the theatrical cut, that apparently tested really poorly, because test audiences evidently don't know what's good for them.
Yeah, and so he just ends up blowing up all of them?
Yeah, I kind of zoned out once I realized the twist wasn't coming. But yeah, they're just zombies that suck blood and burn in sunlight. And he just explodes a lot of them with grenades. That's it. That's the ending.
Yeah, it's a really good movie. It's one of those movies that, like, it's really good until it's not.
Yeah.
And then very suddenly and very completely, it is bad.
Like, if they just kept the original twist in the theatrical version, I would say, very good movie. Like, it's well shot. Will Smith is good in it, as, like, acting pretty much alone with this dog that he has a dog. The dog's great. Like, it has good emotional beats. It has good, like, ambiguity leading up to the ending.
Yeah. And pretty decent action.
Yeah. Like, it's a well-done movie until the theatrical cut completely missed the point of the source material in the most stunning whiff of an adaptation I've ever seen.
Have you seen the Percy Jackson movies?
I have. I saw the first one, which was really bad, but I heard the second one was way worse.
Yeah, the second one is probably the most stunning whiff of a theatrical adaptation I've ever seen.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, the Percy Jackson film was also a really terrible adaptation, but it just, like, changed a bunch of stuff and made a bad film. I Am Legend literally took the opposite stance of the book.
Yeah, the Percy Jackson movies, they just made a different, all right film that wasn't the Percy Jackson. For the first one, it just wasn't the source material, like, at all. Mm-hmm. With I Am Legend, it's like
they inverted the point of the source material.
Pretty much the source material up until they're like, meh.
Yeah. So if you can find the version that has the edited version, and I'm sure there's a legal way to get it, so do that. 100%.
There's a director's cut, and I'll link to it in the show notes. There's a director's cut or something, or an ultimate edition that isn't the theatrical release. Just avoid the theatrical release.
Actually, watch the theatrical release after you watch the good version and compare and agree with me. Because I need this to be a more widespread opinion, because a lot of people are just like, oh, that movie was kind of boring because it left out the important part of the plot.
All right. What else do you have for us, Quinn?
Okay, and this, to be clear, this next one coming up, and the one that we've been building to all episode, is not in any way anything that's going to wind up on anyone's top 10 sci-fi movie lists.
No, it's not like a definitive game changer or anything.
No, and in fact, it's a dumb punchy movie tonally in the same way, I think, as Pacific Rim, while also being a comedy. And it's not like even the best dumb punchy movie comedy sci-fi thing ever. That was Ghostbusters.
But it is real good.
It is really good. It's called Evolution. And I would actually say it is the true sequel to Ghostbusters spiritually. In that it is sci-fi instead of like supernatural, and in that Ghostbusters 2 was not very good.
Yeah, Ghostbusters 2 was just like, it reminded me a lot of the the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie. It's like there's this pink ooze that's like inexplicably the entire plot, and then there's also a weird like pale guy.
Yeah, and also that could be used to describe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Secret of the Ooze. Yeah.
Ghostbusters 2 was not
the early 90s had a lot of pink ooze as the villain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess, most of them were like industrial wastes or something. And, given the period and the political events, I guess it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, like it follows, but it's still...
It's still kind of...
Why was it all pink?
Kind of a weird theme, yeah. Anyway, Evolution, in which the plot-resolving ooze is not pink...
It is, in fact, shampoo.
It is, in fact, shampoo.
So, like, the basic premise is alien life lands on Earth in this meteor and evolves really, really quickly because science. It's something to do with our atmosphere, I think.
Because reasons.
And it stars David Duchovny, Fox Mulder from The X-Files, and other TV things. He's done other stuff. I just don't. I haven't seen it.
It stars David Duchovny and others.
Yeah, as pretty much David Duchovny, really.
Yeah.
Which is where most of the humor comes from.
Yeah, he's not putting on much of a character.
No.
But yeah, it's really funny and
yeah, like it's definitely like a sci-fi comedy.
Yeah, so the original script was a dramatic movie that had basically the same plot but was serious and gritty, and actually probably ended with them blowing it up.
I'm sure. I haven't read the original script.
Yeah, but and again, spoilers for this one, but it's a comedy, so the jokes are still funny. The way they ultimately kill the aliens is with Head and Shoulders, Selsun Blue.
Head and Shoulders.
Head and Shoulders.
It is 100% Head and Shoulders, and you have made that mistake every time we've discussed this movie for the past 10 times.
There are 2 dandruff shampoos, Quinn, and I don't bother to differentiate between them. Yeah, but there's like, you can really like tell that this was a dramatic script made into a comedy because the plot is there. The plot is there, and it's pretty decent. Like it's good.
It's simple, but it's well done.
Yeah, and then there are jokes worked into that rather than being a whole bunch of jokes strung together by a tenuous plot.
Which is why, again, I consider it kind of a spiritual successor to Ghostbusters, because Ghostbusters has that same thing going, where it's a good, solid ghost apocalypse plot. I was about to say ghost story, and it's really not.
No.
It's a ghost apocalypse plot that has funny people being funny as that plot plays out, and Evolution's kind of the same way.
Yeah, definitely. And we both very highly recommend it.
Yeah, and it really needs a sequel, so somebody... send this to David Duchovny and get him to make more of that series. David
Duchovny, avid listener of our radio show, and then he actually listens to them as the podcast again. Surprisingly, just like we have about 25 views per episode, give or take. 20 of those are David Duchovny. He just loops it. I don't, David, if you're listening.
Make more of that movie.
Make more of that movie, but also thank you. I would never have expected this kind of success. But yeah, Jurassic Park, Pacific Rim,
the good version of I Am Legend.
The good version of I Am Legend, and Evolution.
For some kind of like pseudo non-franchisey, because everything is becoming franchisized.
Initially non-franchisey.
Yeah.
That is the time we have for this week. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Quinn, for these lovely recommendations. Next week, we will be doing This Thing Part 2.
With your recommendations.
With my recommendations.
Which are going to be a lot more kind of movies with a thing to say for the most part.
Yeah, definitely taking a much more speculative approach, or a speculative fiction approach to science fiction. It'll be movies that are not only good science fiction, but are good science fiction with a message.
Yeah.
That is all the time we have for this week. We've finally come up with an outro line that we both kind of like.
Yep. It only took us, what, a month?
More than a month and a half. This will be episode 6 when it goes live.
Oh.
But until next week, get out there and enjoy something.